good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's Valerie Ling here. How are you going? I had a conversation that I thought was worth sharing about, what are the different pathways actually to burn out again? And I thought it was worth sharing because you might be somebody who fits this category of maybe feeling misunderstood, or even feeling like the things that people are suggesting for you to recharge is not quite hitting the mark. So let me get my thoughts gathered here and just present the framework and then speak into that. So because there are different, fundamentally pathways to burnout, really, I think this is, I haven't written the book about this, but just because I work clinically in the area so much, these are my observations. One type of burnout really is where the emotional exhaustion really sets in, and a feeling that what we're doing is really Groundhog Day, we're pulling away from people, we're getting tired. And one part of that is a pathway that's related to the caring aspect of what we do. So if we are pouring into other people's worlds and lives, very often there is a self-sacrifice script going on, a guilt of not doing, not giving, not caring enough. And so it leads to then the overuse, if you like, of the caring and the giving and the output muscle without enough of the input. And very nicely, when you think of things like self-care and resting, those sorts of paradigms really work there. There's another pathway to that, so you build on that, where you're someone who might be a carer, but you're also in a paid role, let's say. And what tends to happen typically there is that there's also then a lack of values alignment and a feeling of connection to the community that you're working with, and probably also a misalignment of fundamental organizational ethos. So that's the type of scenario where maybe you're working in a hospital, or you're working in a non-for-profit scenario where you're okay to push and to give and to work if you've got a sense that the organization that you're working in has got your back, or it's for a good cause. The way that we spend profit is, it ticks the box for me. The way that we're being led, leadership, so workplace burnout, where you have the ability to negotiate for resources, right? There is also another pathway, maybe type of burnout. I like the word pathway a little bit more because it just says that, there are different ways that we can get to that same element of burnout. And that is the high impact person. They're your elite athletes, your performers, your musicians, your entrepreneurs, your celebrity. Would love to have a celebrity work with me. Not because I want to be famous. I'm just always intrigued by what goes on behind the public face. Anyway, let me get back to my point. That is, again, more of impinging really on a sense of self, okay? Where the fear is that if I don't hustle, if I don't do, if I don't paddle, if I don't push, if I don't, rob from my sleep tank, I'm fundamentally not going to achieve. Achieve what? It's not just success, but achieve purpose, right? So it's worth it if I can feel like the path that I'm driving to is getting somewhere, making a difference, providing for my family and their family, pushing the boundaries of what is considered achievable in speed and time. That sort of pathway to burnout has got a lot to do with capacity, right? So underestimating our need for recharging and resourcing, and overestimating our capacity to push. And then there becomes an over-reliance on the doing. Now, the fear pathways for each of these things in terms of what maintains the mechanisms of burnout, there's some similarities. I think, though, from my observation, can be very different. And in high impact achieving, performing type burnout, you do get things like perfectionism, but also a fear that ultimately you're going to let others down, not in terms of they're not going to feel like you care enough of them, but that you've gone off course somehow, right? If it's going to be worth it, if you're going to invest this much, you want to actually make sure that you're on point, in the center of, that feeling of what you're doing is, in the right direction. And what's interesting for me, anecdotally anyway, working in this space, is that you kind of have to understand the pathways. How do people get to the place where they're at? And in a way, almost the ordering of the clusters of burnout. Is it emotional exhaustion? Is it feeling a lack of a sense of achievement and purpose? Excuse me. Is it feeling disconnected from others? It can actually be ordered a little differently depending on the pathway. And so a one-size-fits-all approach really may not work, because unless we understand that not only the source of it, which is often thought to be just about output, people are doing more than they need to do. It's often thought about as a resourcing, as in work type and then you rest, right? This dichotomy, you do or you don't do. But it can actually interact quite differently. So for example, someone who is in that high-paced capacity, performance elite athlete type space, telling them to do less actually really sinks their sense of self and meaning even furthermore. Telling someone who's a personal carer to care less, don't do as much, just fuels, right, that feeling that they're actually not as connected to what they're supposed to be doing. Addressing an emotional exhaustion, though, in terms of boundaries and where to self-care and where to pull back would make sense. So be aware that if you are experiencing burnout, or if you know someone who is, it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. It's actually really important to understand the pathways, where it got to, and actually to understand what will again spark the sense that, okay, I'm recharged, I'm recentered, I'm refueled, and reignited now to go again for the next chapter and the next leg. Okay, take care.